Okay. So good evening. How are you? How are you? I haven't seen you in a while. Okay. So I usually don't like to begin with the words, the parsha of the week. First of all, enough people have been turned off by weekly sermons. They usually begin that precisely that way. That in this week's parsha it says so and so. Then they connect it with the bris, or with the yahrzeit, or with the bar mitzvah. And being that one of the things I always emphasize in this get together, I have been, I guess, honored, or whatever word you want to use for it, to be exposed to many different type of people, including many who have been turned off by what we call conventional Judaism. And yes, though you have some very strong, insulated Orthodox communities that have thriving institutions and yeshivas and establishments, but it really in many ways is segregated from the larger secular Jewish world. And these two worlds, so to speak, the secular Jew, the observant one, don't usually interact except maybe in business. And when they do interact, especially on religious levels, there isn't usually a common ground and common denominator. In Israel, this is very much amplified in the so-called split between what they call the Charedim, the ultra-Orthodox, and the Chilonim, which are the secular. To the point of even, I don't like to use the word, but even hatred and distrust and condescension, and going both directions. So everybody's a culprit here. In America, it's also true. Maybe not. It's not as heated, perhaps, but nevertheless, we all know about the struggle, the fight, the battle between science and religion, between faith and modernity. Till this day, we have these best-selling books the last few years that are driven by radical atheism, and then, of course, there are many books, and very popular today, also radical faith. And this battle rages. So I, in my own way, have been exposed to it in many different ways, being someone that has grown up in a traditional home and environment. So I'm quite familiar with the so-called radicalism within the religious circles. But then, at the same time, my father was a journalist, and I was generally exposed to many ideas that were outside of the so-called Orthodox sphere. And as a result, I had the keen opportunity to be able to communicate with and meet many people from different circles. And especially once my book was published, Toward a Meaning for Life, and I went out there in a book tour, not knowing what I was getting into, I finally discovered a really very secular world that wouldn't even walk into a building like this, or into any, for that matter, Jewish environment, a synagogue, and so on. It was just called unaffiliated. As they say, there are those that go to Orthodox synagogues and conservative temples, and as well as Reform, Reconstruction. And then there are many who don't go to any of them because they've been turned off by the whole religious issues and the religious dogma, no matter what denomination it may be. And those are the people that actually, the ones that I gravitated to most, because it always seemed to me, in a way, for me at least, it was the easiest to communicate with. Because as they say, knowing half of something is worse than knowing nothing. When you're talking to people who have like a clean slate, it's easier to talk and discuss spiritual matters than with someone who thinks they have God figured out already, or they have a monopoly, so-called, on the truth. And so I've been exposed particularly to many angry Jews. When I say angry, people who grew up, whether they grew up in a traditional home or other type of homes, but they grew up in environments where they were turned off by the hypocrisy, by the irrelevance, by the dichotomy between so-called biblical and Jewish standards, and no one really living up to them, by hollow prayer, by synagogues that were more like funeral parlors, etc., etc. These are not my words. These are words that I heard in my journey. So I found in my own way, my mission, in a way, was to bridge these two worlds. Because I, too, am naturally a skeptic. And as I grew up and challenged my own, the belief system that I was taught, I came to discover, yes, that many people are absolutely clueless. And you could even say brainless in as far as challenging or questioning their own teachings, or they just accept, whether it's out of conformity or out of comfort or out of pressure or out of just plain not wanting to rock the boat, apathy. But for one to really have a meaningful life, for one to really have a meaningful spiritual experience, it requires challenging, above all, your own preconceptions and your notions, including your religious ones, or non-religious ones, or anti-religious ones. So when you go with that from that perspective, it becomes much easier to communicate with people, because people sense sincerity. As they say, words that come from the heart enter the heart. And I think if one is a healthy skeptic, and you communicate it in a healthy way, there's a certain resonance, because we all have a certain measure of skepticism. But there's the key difference between a healthy skeptic and an unhealthy one. A healthy skeptic is someone who is not afraid of asking questions and challenging so-called the norm or the status quo. But what makes the person healthy is that they're ready to hear a position or an opinion that may not be what they like to hear. You know, they say statistically that 80 or 90% of people today, based on different studies, read and only will stick to things that confirm preconceived notions they have. I'm sure nobody in this room fits into that category, but there are people like that. They say 80, 90% of people. So I don't know if this room fits into that standard. Now, why is that? Not because people are malicious, because that's how the human brain works. As we get older, maybe young newborn children who have been unshaped and not yet formed. So they, of course, if you look at a young child, as I observe my granddaughter, or anyone observes a young child, you see, they explore the world very, very objectively. Everything for them is an adventure. They haven't yet formed decisions that this person is, I mean, obviously children react. If they feel something is dangerous or they feel anger, they may be turned off. But generally, they explore the world in a very open-minded way. But as we grow older, we develop our perspectives, which isn't a bad thing per se. That's what maturity is called. It becomes bad when your perspective becomes so molded that there's no room for any other perspective. And then there's no communication. And this is not just about politics and about international relations and mediation. It's also about relationships, our own relationships with each other, our communication skills, and so on. So, as I said, as I developed my own tools and I had these opportunities, I actually embraced I would say with relish even, the opportunity to get out of my own comfort zone and meet with people that were from different backgrounds than myself. And it always created the most dynamic energy possible. This class that you're sitting at right now is an outgrowth of actually this interaction that I had with many people of those different so-called schools of thought and backgrounds. And we didn't sit in this room at that time. Many years ago, when we were all younger people, it was in my home or it was in my office. And then finally we moved to the city. It's a long story about how this so-called Wednesday night class evolved. But suffice it to say that it grew out of completely non-scripted structure. It was spontaneous. No one knew what was coming. And bottom line was everyone brought their soul to the table without any preconceived notions. And I include myself in that, as much as possible, which is often seen as by allowing yourself to be challenged and allowing open dialogue. So going back, that's a healthy skeptic. So a healthy skeptic is someone who challenges, questions, without any taboos, but at the same time is ready and open to hear different perspectives. An unhealthy skeptic, of course, is someone who just uses arguments as an excuse or a smokescreen to justify their position. And from the outset, they will never change their mind, and they're not interested in another position, even though they won't admit it. And that's an unhealthy skeptic that's usually driven by insecurity, fear, and just a need to justify your position. So if you're smart, you know how to create a sophisticated smokescreens. If you're not so smart, they're not so sophisticated. So brains can actually become, in that sense, a detriment, because essentially it's an insecure person with a lot of brains hiding his or her insecurity, which of course complicates all the matters. And then, of course, there's the third category that I already mentioned, which is people who are not skeptics altogether. They just accept the status quo, conformists, or whatever you want to call them. And that's another category. So I like to believe that our sitting here is in the category of the healthy skeptic one, which doesn't mean we don't have positions. It doesn't mean we're not ready to share them, but it means that we're ready to hear and open ourselves up to different perspectives. Now, I know some of you are real skeptics can say, well, that's very nice of you to say. You're sitting there with the floor, and no one else speaks except you, which means me, that is, and which is true in a way. However, that's not my intention. Obviously, we can all speak at once. I just ask you to share with me in this journey. And the truth is, as those of you that know me, I'm more than open to hear everyone's perspective here. I'm ready to hear it both in person or in communication. And hopefully we can all learn and grow from the process. So with that so-called introduction of what we're doing here, let me go to the theme of this evening, which is why I resisted in the opening. I said I didn't want to start with this week's chapter in the Parsha in the Torah, because that I know from my experience is the first way you turn off anybody, especially those who have had negative experiences with Parshas, because the last time they heard about it was either their bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, and heard about it in a very irrelevant and impersonal way. So what I usually do is I speak about a theme that has a psychological and personal relevance to us, and then somewhere smuggle in the connection to the Torah chapter once the trust has been established. So it's somewhat manipulative, if I may say so myself, but as soon as you tell people that you're manipulative, it's not as manipulative. Or maybe that's the biggest manipulation. I'll let you determine that, okay? But bottom line is called transparency. So I'm not, look, I'm sitting here with a beard and a yarmulke, so frankly, it's not so easy to hide where I'm coming from. But at the same time, I do say to you at the outset, as a very important disclaimer, honestly, I'm a human being just like you, which means we all struggle with similar issues. We all deal with pain. We all deal with joy, and we all want to have happy lives and meaningful lives and try to find some inner peace. Unity is a search, universal search. And for me, the entire Jewish journey, so to speak, the Torah journey is all about these universal principles. And they're not about religious dogma or do's and don'ts. Obviously, the Torah and Judaism has requirements and expectations of us. But as those of you that have come to this class before know, you can look at them in two ways. One of them as these rules, rigid rules that just tell you what to do and what not to do. Or you can look at them as musical notes. And musical notes are ways to teach you how to play music. Unfortunately, most don't know this latter formula or how to look at the Torah as musical notes. So I'm not ashamed to say that I'm coming from a Torah perspective, but my objective is to help us all learn to play the music in ways that are personally relevant, psychologically pertinent, things that can help us through the struggles and the challenges that we all deal with. Now, I don't profess to know what everyone is struggling with today or tonight, but there are general universal things that we're all dealing with, whether it's in areas of relationships or the economy or other personal and social, interpersonal issues. So it all goes under the general umbrella, and God blessed us that we're able to communicate with each other, even we don't always know what is going on in another person's heart and soul. But because we are of the same flesh and blood, and we are made up of certain common fields of energy, if you want to put it that way, we have an ability to empathize with each other, and we have an ability to identify and share if we allow our egos, if we put our egos aside and allow our so-called soulful unity to emerge. So with that being said, the theme of this evening is self-generated success versus entitlement. So we all hear about the ideas. You hear about people who are called a self-made man or self-made woman. Others who are in the other category called, well, some people call it old wealth or new wealth. If it's in the world of wealth, the people who are not yet in the world of wealth altogether. And it's a unique issue which affects all of us one way or another. As we wrote in the email describing tonight's class, you have one category of people, or you may be one of them, that always feels a sense of deprivation. You look around and you see other people who've been blessed, either growing up in wealthy homes, entitled homes, or having other resources and gifts. And you can feel at times that if you grow up in poverty or not having other opportunities that others have, there's a sense of deprivation, which can be which can lie at the heart and root of a lot of our choices and mechanisms. It can create bitterness, it can create envy, it can create many things that affect us every moment of our lives. And then you have people in the other extreme who grew up with opportunities and gifts, and have sometimes to the point they've been spoiled, and have a sense of entitlement, and almost feel like they are better than others. I only said almost to be kind, but now sometimes it's not just almost, they actually feel that way. Simply not to any of their own efforts, but simply to where they were born and to whom they were born. Maybe it's attitudes that their own parents and their own elite environment transfer to them. And of course, the battle rages of which category would you rather be in? Would you rather be a spoiled, entitled brat, but at least you have everything you want physically, though you may have been castrated or lost your motivation because you never really had to earn anything? Or would you rather be a person who's grown up without any of those opportunities and really earned your way? Now, of course, everyone answers when you ask that question, I'd like to have the best of both worlds. Why can't I have the first and not be spoiled, and at the same time also exert myself and generate magic through my own efforts? Well, it's true that is the best of both worlds. The problem is that it usually doesn't happen, because there are certain built-in liabilities. When a person is given a gift, there's certain things that, whether you like it or not, human nature tends to behave a certain way. So let's use a Talmudic expression. The Talmud says, "Adam reitze b'kav shalei, yosem mitisha kavim shel chaverei," which simple English means a person has more desire in one kav is, okay, it's a measurement. We'll say $1 that they earn on their own than $9 that someone else gives them as a gift. It's an expression in the Talmud. It's a very profound expression. I mean, usually the Talmud speaks in terms that sound simple. It sounds like almost like an economic thing. But if you think about it, it's a deep psychological insight, which is that $1 earned is going to be more valuable to you than $9 given to you by someone else. Even though with $9 you can buy 9 times as much as with $1. But because you haven't earned it, you don't appreciate it as much. It's not yours. You don't own it. Doesn't mean the $9 one could also own it. Now it's your gift, but you've never earned the right to own it. So unconsciously, subconsciously, psychologically speaking, it's easier to blow $9 that's given to you than $1 that you've earned. On a deeper level, using another expression from another Talmud, in the Jerusalem Talmud, there's an expression called nema dechsufa. It's Aramaic for, it's called bread of shame, which means bread given to you by another is called bread of shame. You haven't earned it. There's something about human nature that is embarrassed or even humiliated when you have something that you haven't earned. Now, I'm sure you'll point out to me people who have no problem with that and are not ashamed at all. Well, that just means that maybe there's more bigger problems going on. But human nature is such that you want to earn something. And look at it even in basic maturity process. As we grow into adults, and this happens several stages in our lives, in adolescence, even younger, everyone relative to their stage, there's a point as we so-called cut the umbilical cord. So, of course, there's the physical cutting of the umbilical cord that happens upon birth. But then it will happen several other times in our lives, psychologically speaking, as a child begins to separate from their parents. In a good way, I mean. Separate when you begin to recognize yourself as an independent individual. And in different stages, and this is documented, and it's natural to all of us, there will be the rebellion of this new independent individual breaking away from the parent. And this is not considered to be an unhealthy thing. This is actually considered to be a very healthy thing. If a child remains in the womb for too long, that would be not healthy. And the same thing psychologically. If a child remains constantly attached to its mother and father and doesn't have the ability, is not allowed to explore, it will grow up as an insecure child. In other words, confidence is built as the child begins to explore. Obviously, a delicate balance has to be created because, take for example, when a child begins to walk. First steps, the child will fall. That's inevitable. No one walks the first time. So, if you're a compassionate parent, you say, I don't want my child to fall even once. You'll always hold their hand. Is that healthy? Obviously not, because the child will never learn to walk on their own. On the other hand, for you to just completely abandon the child and say, you know what, learn to walk on your own, I'll come back tomorrow, that's also unhealthy. So a healthy parent does the following. You're there in the room, and you show your child, I'm here, walk toward me. So the child knows that you're there. At the same time, there's a sense of independence. And it is a delicate thing, because you're there to show them, I'll be there to help pick you up. I'll be there if you make a mistake, so on and so forth. This is just a small little example that every one of us can relate to. But this happens at least 6-7 times through our maturity process. At a later stage in our lives, it will happen the first time we go to school, or the first time we go away from home. And then later it will happen as we get married, and we move on and move out of our parents' house, or the first time we get a job. I mean, this will happen many times. And you'll see that in parenting, as well as from the perspective of the child, many of the mistakes that parents make with children is one extreme or the other. Either too much independence, and the child doesn't even feel it has anyone there to turn to, or the other extreme, too much smothering and control, whether conscious or not, or whether obvious or not, that doesn't allow the person to become independent. And a healthy parent is the one that knows the balance and works on it. No one's perfect. Mistakes will be made. But it's a process. Now, this just tells us, just to go back to that concept, so even if we are good parents and we want to give our children everything that they desire and make their lives as comfortable as possible, logic dictates. I'm not talking about emotions. Logic just dictates that there are times when not giving your child something may be the healthiest thing for them. Not because you don't want to, not because you're cheap or stingy or detached, but simply in a very deliberate fashion know that this is healthier for the child's independence. Now, as I said, this isn't simple, because what happens if your child says, well, I think I do want that, and I do need that. Let me make the decision. The battles begin. But it all comes down to how healthy we are as individuals, how honest we are, and usually honesty and health are direct in proportion to how this balance is achieved in the best possible way. It's obvious when parents themselves are insecure and have grown up in their homes where there was a lot of control. They too will often exert that control. And control doesn't always mean because you're so powerful. It could also mean because you're so weak. And insecure, you don't have the confidence to let somebody else breathe or recognize that different children have different needs. I'm just using this as an example to show that this in-between balance between so-called self-generated effort and what is given to someone is not a black and white thing. And it requires a lot of thought and, above all, a real understanding of human nature. So to go back to what I was saying there's a part of human nature that does not want someone to give it to you. You'll find many children, very, very talented, growing up even in very healthy homes, when they're offered a job by their parent, don't want to work for a parent. Even if the job is a good job and even if there's good boundaries and healthy boundaries, because there's something inside of us that says, I want to make it on my own. Now, maybe years later you may regret it and say, look, I could have gotten that and then made it on my own. But there's something inside of us that rejects that because we don't want to feel that we didn't do it on our own, that was given to us and we didn't earn it. So there's no question healthy pride or healthy sense of dignity demands a certain element of self-generated effort, something that comes from our effort. At the same time, does that mean that we should reject the gifts or the blessings that are given to us or presented to us? So these are big questions that I have no doubt affect all of us in many different ways. It could be just simply each of us fits in a different category of how we grew up and where we grew up. Some in that first category where a feeling almost like deprivation, or the second category of an entitlement. And each of us are challenged because you cannot say that one is better than the other, because the fact is, and this is an empirical fact, There are people who've grown up in very harsh circumstances, with nothing given to them, at least ostensibly, and became major achievers and and achieved real excellence. You could even argue that because of their so-called deprivation, that was their motivation to get beyond that. But then you find people who are in the same situation, and they remain bitter and broken people, as I mentioned before, and remain victims of their so-called circumstances. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you find people who grew up with all the opportunities and gifts and blew it, even became self-destructive, or maybe worse or maybe better, whatever, however you want to interpret it, just simply never really became adults, have never really achieved anything. Obviously, it's not an easy thing to accept or to admit, so the people know how to hide that well. I've met many people who are in that category, and they work overtime to make sure that everyone thinks that they're big achievers. But they haven't achieved anything. Everything they've achieved was given to them by somebody else. They make believe they're spending the money that they made. It's not theirs. And you could see the difference if you may not even have to have very strong eyesight for that. And then there are people who grew up with opportunities who have reached high levels of excellence as well, overcome that challenge, or so on. So my point being is that the mere fact that you grew up in one environment or another is not by itself dictate your destiny and your future. There are definitely other factors involved. So all that is part of the discussion here. Obviously with the objective of not just identifying where we fit, but really where we should be going and how it's impacted our lives. And it doesn't matter whether we're 10 years old, 20 years old, 50 years old, or 70 years old. Wherever we are in our lives, these issues have shaped us one way or another. And you'll find that many of our ethical decisions that we make, personal ones, things that sometimes the little choices you make that no one sees but you, are very much influenced by this whole balance between the self-generated and the not, and the one that comes from so-called above. It also, of course, has also a direct connection with our present state of our economy, issues around greed, corruption, wealth, entitlement, of course, and finally, I think, and maybe above all, it has implications in our relationships, in the where we invest the work that we invest in. So there's no question that we all, if we're given the choice, we'd all like to get things as easy as possible on a platter. But at the same time, as I said, there's a part of us that wants to earn the way. So there's the conflict of that. And there's also the issue of course, I should add once we're already talking about it and being thorough, to add the issue of course, pain and loss and how that fits into this. Because obviously when a person suffers a loss or some trauma or some pain, so even if you're a person who grew up with entitlement, pain and loss shakes everybody up. And it usually is a force that creates a challenge that you have to then overcome. And you're not always given then those resources. It's one thing you can give, wealthy parents can give their children money, and they can give them every material need that they have. But how do you give somebody the tools to deal with a challenge? Especially if you grew up with entitlement and suddenly your whole security blanket is pulled out from under you. What does that do to a person who felt that they are better than others? So the implications of this whole discussion, as you see, is quite broad. Obviously, not all can be covered in one evening, but I'll try to cover some of the basic principles. And as I always say, the most important thing of all is to go away with some tools, which means tools that we already have, but sometimes remain obscured and need to be uncovered. So, with that being said, let me connect it now to the portion of the Torah, and you'll see how one word, literally one word in the Bible, this week's chapter, addresses this in the most profound way. And when you understand it in that context, and you'll see it's not forced, it really creates a completely new appreciation of Torah ideas, because the Torah can illuminate with one word such important concepts. And I don't just mean illuminate, as you'll see, it gets into quite sophisticated detail. So a book thousands of years ago can address something that's so contemporary and has such relevance today. So imagine what other themes and other chapters relevance carries. So you have this chapter called Ba'alescha, that we're in, which is the third chapter in the fourth book of the 5 books of the Torah. So we're in the book of Numbers, or called Bamidbar, and we're in chapter 3, Ba'alescha. And the chapter begins that God speaks to Moses and tells him the following. Tell Aaron, which was his brother, the high priest, and speak to Aaron and tell him, Ba'alescha saneres. He commands him, Ba'alescha saneres. You shall kindle the flames. And he's referring to the mitzvah which the high priest had, specific mitzvah that the high priest had, which was that every day in the temple he would light the menorah, which was a so-called eternal flame, light the menorah, and my batteries have to be changed.
As long as we're lighting things.
Right. Okay. So he's told by Moses, his commands Aaron in the name of God, that you shall light the menorah. And this was every day, the menorah that was lit inside the temple. The closest thing we have to a menorah today is what we light on Hanukkah, or Friday night when we light the candles. So this was a mitzvah, it was a constant mitzvah in the times of the temple. Beginning from the portable temple, the Mishkan, the sanctuary that the Jews traveled with through the wilderness, which is what it's referring to here. So Rashi, the commentary, who is a classic commentary, and today is an indispensable resource to understand even the basic biblical verses. So Rashi, who cites this from the Medrash, in the name of a question, asks, what is this word Ba'alescha? Ba'alescha is a very uncommon word in the Torah. The Hebrew word for kindling a flame, so those of you who light Shabbos candles know it's lahadlik. Lahadlik ner. Hadlokas haneres. Hadloka means to kindle, to light a flame. Lahadlik. Dolak is the root word. Here the Torah uses the word Ba'alescha. The word Ba'alescha literally means to elevate, to raise. It comes from the word aliyah. When we say aliyah, people go to Israel, they call it aliyah, it means that they lift themselves. They travel up, they ascend to Israel. Spiritual ascent. So Ba'alescha refers to a word that means elevate. So it's like saying elevate or raise the flames. What is the significance of this word? It's the wrong word in this sentence. So Rashi, citing the Medrash, and this is actually also has halachic, which means legal implications, says that the mitzvah was not just that Aaron should light the flames, but that Aaron should make sure that the flames rise on their own. What this means is specifically, when you light flames, and you put let's say with a master flame, with a mother flame, you take the flame and you light one candle. So if you notice, it takes a split second for the candle to catch, the oxygen to catch. So the mitzvah here is that it was not enough for Aaron to light it. He had to wait till he saw the flame rise on its own, and then move to the next flame of the 7 branches of the candelabra, of the menorah. That's what Rashi says. And that's why the Torah changes the word, because the Torah is saying to Aaron, don't just kindle the flames, don't just light them, make sure that they rise on their own. The word Rashi uses, Achetehei shalheves elam elah. Light them until the shalheves, the flames, rise, they rise me'elah, on their own. So the question that's asked, the obvious question, which Rashi doesn't answer, Rashi just makes the statement. Rashi answers the question why the Torah says Ba'alescha. But the question just carries over from Rashi to the verse itself. Why is it that important to raise the flames? Who cares if the high priest will just light the flame, move quickly to the next one? It burns out, you come back, and you light it again. Let's say he didn't wait. So it may light anyway, or if not, he returns to it. Why is it so significant that the Torah has to go change the entire word, and out of the ordinary change the word from kindling to raising, just to make this point, as if it's like, why is this such a major issue? As if to say that if Aaron did not do that, it's as if he didn't do the mitzvah. It's a technicality. So the worst is it'll burn out. And then he'll light it. So the answer given is very much connected to our entire discussion. It always goes back, of course, to what exactly is the significance of lighting the menorah in the first place. Why is it so important? What is the meaning of lighting a menorah? And this question, of course, is a general one, even when you read about the menorah the first time in the Torah, which is back in the book of Exodus. But especially when you see here, this chapter makes a big thing about lighting the menorah, more than other mitzvahs and other customs that were done in the temple. You see the menorah stands out, not just here, but many places in the Torah. Firstly, in the temple itself here, the menorah of Aleisches Haneres is a whole chapter. We find the Jewish tradition, as I mentioned, lighting flames is a continuous theme, whether it's Friday night, whether it's holidays, whether it's Havdul in times of pain and loss, a Yortzeit, a Shama candle that we light Yom Kippur, before Yom Kippur, an entire year after someone passes. And then, of course, Hanukkah candles and Hanukkah flames. So you see that the theme of the menorah is quite central to Jewish life, at many different extremes. So what is the significance of lighting the menorah? Which will teach us, in turn, why it's so important, the raising of the flames, as opposed to just kindling them. So, in a nutshell, lighting the menorah is really the purpose of existence and life itself. To use the Kabbalistic terminology, for existence to emerge, meaning an independent reality like ours, for us to be here and feel that we exist as independent, self-contained individuals, from a Kabbalistic perspective, poses a very fundamental philosophical dilemma. Because from the mystic's perspective, all of existence is one integral unity. Today, this isn't uncommon in modern physics. Quantum mechanics also sees the universe as that. In other words, what we witness or what we experience as a fragmented, compartmentalized universe is really an illusion. It's the illusion of the naked eye just seeing a bunch of pieces and thinking that the universe is made up of a bunch of unrelated components. That's not at all the case. This universe is one symbiosis made up of, yes, trillions of pieces, but they all work in a fascinating way as one, unless a human being gets in the way and can, of course, upset the balance. But just study nature. Today we are able to have we have the luxury to be able to see close up through cameras the fascinating synchronicity of nature. Just study one species, let alone all the species, underwater, on land. Just see all these nature shows. It's unbelievable. And each one has its own elegance and its own poetry. As I said, unless humans come in the way to upset the balance, it's fascinating. Even when there's destruction, it's fascinating. There's a forest fire. So hopefully it doesn't hurt anybody. But how the forest regenerates, how life regenerates. Go to the lowest parts of the depths of the sea, where there's literally no light, and you think it's a complete cemetery. Today we've discovered a whole other life emerges from that. It's just fascinating the whole way nature works. And you see, you don't need to be brilliant to see that there's an unbelievable script, as I said, an eloquence that connects it all. And especially when you start looking at the food chain, and you see how one thing impacts another, things you'd never imagine, millions of miles apart, can have an impact. And as I mentioned, quantum mechanics goes even further, whether it's through string theory or other theories that try to understand how is it possible that subatomic particles literally sense each other, even though they may be hundreds of millions of miles apart, faster than the speed of light. And this is nothing to do with religion. This is not faith. This is science, proven time and again. So the mystics, in this sense, shared the same idea, the same mystique, that there's some integral unity that this universe is driven by. The way the mystics put it, the Kabbalists put it, is, as we say every day in the Shema, Hashem Echad. Because there's one God, so there's one unity that is infused in all of existence. So as many, pieces of the puzzle there may be, it's all driven by one unified force. Think of it as a composer of music. So it may have hundreds of thousands of musical notes, but they're all part of one symphony. So yes, when the Archduke said to Mozart, purportedly, he's considered himself a connoisseur, an entitled connoisseur of music. So he said to Mozart, "Beautiful music, but far too many notes." So Mozart, so-called, as they say, allegedly purportedly responded, said to him, "Yes, Your Majesty, but not one more than necessary." So yes, you come into a big, beautiful building or structure, and you may not understand the wisdom of the architect or the engineer, or for that matter, music, and you say, "You know what? Let's cut off this whole section here." And the architect comes and says, "I can't believe what you did. The whole building was based on, this whole..." Now, of course, artists can sometimes be a little eccentric when it comes to these things, but the fact is, it's very, very possible, someone who understands, who's meticulously built something, made out of many pieces, and understands how they all work together, that the naked eye may not see it. But today we understand these things, and we also understand that many of it is unfathomable to the extent of its unity. So to go back, so what is the question that the mystics have? How then is it possible that we can hurt each other? How is it possible that if we are all part of one larger unity, how can we hurt each other when in fact we're hurting ourselves? In other words, if you go and in some way defile even the environment, let alone hurt another person, you're really hurting a part of yourself. The Talmud puts it this way: we're all like organs in one body. Is it conceivable that one hand should hit another hand? Is it conceivable that one part of the body will reject another part? Tragically, there are diseases of that sort. And of course, when there's a transplant, it's a whole process to allow the body to override the body's natural instinct to reject a foreign entity. But in a healthy person, as complex and so-called diverse our human body is, there's some voice, or there's some, call it, conductor that is connecting it all, or telling them all work together with each other. No one really understands it. Because if, God forbid, if someone from Martian would come and look at a human body dissected, they'd never believe that all these systems can be put into one body. A nervous system, a circulatory system, a neural system. I mean, they work with they have different rules. They work in different ways. 75 trillion cells in the human body. All you need is one mutation, God forbid, to wreak havoc. So if you take this to the larger universal sense of it, the mystics wonder, how is it possible that we should be self-contained, independent individuals, and not just that, but can actually hurt each other, when in fact we're hurting ourselves? Would anyone go hurt themselves? The only answer is, we're not aware of it. You're not aware that another person sitting near you, that you may be hurting, is part of you. So imagine your own body saying your right hand hitting its left hand without knowing it's part of the same body. That's beyond the tragedy. That is called very destructive. So the mystics wonder, how is that possible that we should have such a distorted vision? As I said, we don't have a long night here to go into all the different analysis and the different philosophical perspectives, but to sum up, in the words of the Arizal, the answer is because God, in the purpose of existence, concealed that unity. There was a very intentional, deliberate effort to conceal the unity for us to be able to be ourselves. In other words, were we constantly aware of, cognizant of this unity, we would not be individuals. We would be so so-called I don't want to say overwhelmed, but we'd be so much, so submerged in a higher sense of reality that we would not be able to really be independent individuals and make choices. In other words, essentially we would not be individuals altogether. In other words, you can say that reality, as we know it, our perception is really driven by blindness. It's driven by concealment. So though we like to think of ourselves as enlightened people, and people who see it all or perceive it all, in fact, the mere fact that we exist as we are and sense our egos and sense ourselves, self-interest comes first, is a sign that something profound was concealed from us. And in many ways, our lives are a search to find that higher reality, because we sense there's something more, and we look for it. Some of us more desperate to look for it than others. Some of us become so invested in this perception that we don't really necessarily search. But I would say every human being at some point in their life has searched or has somewhere sensed something beyond our perception. So the question then above all is why? Why conceal this reality from us? Because without it, we are not who we are. We would not be individuals. And in different words you can say, because the purpose of existence is for us to take a dark world, a world where reality, true reality is concealed, and for us to illuminate it. And that is the significance of the menorah, of lighting flames. It is the mission of our lives for each of us to be a walking menorah, basically. Where we grow up, we are born into a dark universe, dark in many ways. Dark doesn't mean the sun is not shining. There are people who can have their eyes open and also be asleep. Dark means that we are not aware of deeper truths. And we learn them in the process of life, through education, through knowledge. And above all, through resonance. As we grow and we develop tools, we come to realize there are certain truths that were always there within ourselves, but we're concealed. It even says in the Talmud that every one of us, when we were in our mother's womb, was taught the entire Torah, and upon birth were made to forget. The Talmud puts it this way, that an angel comes and makes shh. So that's why you have a cleft over your lip. You can't see it by me because of the mustache, but let's see. Jeff will take a volunteer. Jeff, who has the deepest cleft in the room here? Okay. There you go. It means that you're the least cognizant of what was taught to you. Is that what you're saying? Huh? No, that doesn't work that way. It's not a deeper cleft. Doesn't mean you're less aware. That can just be a genetic thing. But whether this is physical or not, but it's definitely metaphorical. So the question is, what exactly is the reason? Why would you be taught an entire body of knowledge and then made to forget? That's just plain cruel. The answer is, we're not really made to forget. Our conscious minds forget. But our unconscious minds always carry it. Which means, just as your physiological development takes place during 9 months of pregnancy, there's also something else taking place during those 9 months. A child is not just, the fetus is not just developing physically, it's also developing psychologically. Obviously, it's almost impossible for us to recognize that, because you can't send a therapist into a sonogram and interview the child and find out what it's feeling. But for that matter, actually, children probably don't need therapists. It's the adults that do need them. That's another story. Why should a child? Child's getting all its needs met. It doesn't have to deal with its mother's neurosis, et cetera, at least for 9 months. I mean, yeah, you could say the effects of the mother's thoughts and feelings affect the child, but in many ways God's protected the child from that. Obviously, we know today there are also these coke children, God forbid, mothers who abuse drugs or alcohol can affect the child, but I'm not talking such extreme cases. So what's the significance? The significance is that we are born not a clean slate. It's inaccurate to say we're a clean slate. On a conscious level, a child is a clean slate. Doesn't yet speak, so it will speak the language that the parents speak with it. Doesn't yet develop the tools as we know them as mature develop. But the child has in its soul and in its psyche profound knowledge. However, it was made to forget on a conscious level. In order for us, like the Tzimtzum I mentioned, it's concealed in order for us to rediscover them. For instance, children react to music. This is proven even in the womb. Play music, and it's been proven that fetuses in the womb will react to it. Definitely newborns. How does a child know music? It wasn't taught music. Where does it know this from? You have to say that in its psyche it has a reaction, because music is something that's a universal language. It's not taught to us. You can be taught so-called how to play music. You can be taught to have taste in different music. But the mere language of music touching us, in some way lifting our spirits, transporting our soul, ourselves from one place to another, that language is a child recognizes the language. The Kabbalah says that in the mother's womb we're taught particular songs that help prepare us. But that's another discussion, not for this evening. Quite fascinating. So in other words, we don't come out unprepared for life. What unfortunately or fortunately happens is God gives a child to the care of parents, and if they're healthy, nurturing parents, they'll help nurture the child. And then the child's inner instincts and inner music will emerge. Tragically, when that's not done, those inner instincts remain concealed, remain undercover, for us to have to find them later in life, sometimes in very painful ways. But those resources are there within each of us. So there are things, yes, that we acquire in life, but there are things that we're born with. So to go back to the theme here, it means that the purpose of our lives is to come into a world that on its own, there's a certain fundamental concealment. Things are dark. And the mission that each of us has in our own particular unique way, none of us the same way, is to illuminate the darkness of our existence. Your corner of the world. And each of us has our corner. Some of us are put in one place in the world, others in another place. Some of us have these challenges, some have other challenges. So the meaning of the inner meaning, the deeper meaning of a menorah, and lighting a menorah, and Shabbos candles, and Hanukkah candles, and all the other flames I mentioned, is essentially to teach us that we are all menorahs. It's a message to us that you have a flame, and your flame is different than my flame. And wherever you go, you have two choices. Either the flame will not be lit, will not be ignited and illuminate, or it will be. And in simple terms, it means that when you meet people, are they warmed by your presence? Are they lit up by your presence? Or, God forbid, the opposite. They turn cold around you and dark. Or, obviously, the third option is neutral, neither. I would say that fits more into the dark and cold category. But the point is that wherever you go, you have the power to illuminate and to warm your environment. Each of us has that ability. And that, in a way, is a mitzvah. It's not just an ability. It's our mitzvah to do that. We have an obligation to do it. I would say an obligation means a gift. It's a gift. So now let's go now to the word B'halescha itself. So if each of us is here to illuminate, and illuminate can take this shape of educating, inspiring. This doesn't just mean our immediate children and biological dependents. It means everyone around us, which is why the Talmud says, when you teach another person something of some Torah, it's as if you gave birth to them. There are actually even some Hasidim that consider their birthdays the day they first met their mentor, their Rebbe. Not the day they were physically born, because that's when they felt spiritually born. It doesn't take away from their biological birthday. In other words, illuminating and inspiring somebody can be giving birth to somebody. And you never know a word that you say to somebody, how it can affect them. So we all have this mitzvah. As I said, in one sense of it, it's called education. But education doesn't just mean being a teacher in a school where you teach people. Education can be someone you sit by near a subway and how you behave in a certain challenging situation. It can also be an education. Education actually happens more often than not in ways we don't prepare for. In other words, you think you're teaching somebody by telling them something, and sometimes you teach them more by what you did, and you weren't really you don't know you were being watched. And this can go both ways, obviously. Positive and negative. So this is our responsibility. But now let's take it a step further. So why does the Torah insist that it be b'halescha and not b'adlokescha? Which means don't just kindle the flames, but raise them. So now let's talk about this in more specific terms. When you, let's talk about education. Education, we'll use that as an example. I'll use a few examples just to drive the point home. In education, we know that there's two ways to educate someone. Well, there's actually three ways, but I'm not going to mention the first one, which is negative. We'll talk about positive education. A positive education is you can teach someone knowledge, information. Which means before they came to the class or before they signed up for this course, they didn't know this information. And this course will teach you in a curriculum and in a semester or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever it may be, a certain amount of knowledge and information. There's another way of teaching someone, which we'll call teaching someone tools and methodology. The difference is a very obvious one. You teach someone knowledge, you're giving them facts. You don't necessarily mean you're giving them tools to be able to deal with the situation when the teacher is not there. Tools or life skills is a whole different education. Methodology means that you're learning a method that becomes yours even when you leave the presence of the teacher. And there's no question you can see the distinct difference between the two, and there are school systems and teachers, and you can immediately, but with a little time you can tell what they teach. You can see it in the results of what the students become. So the Torah is saying it's not just enough to illuminate and inspire a person that you meet or educate them. You have to touch them in a way where their flame begins to rise on its own. So you can give them, illuminate them, and be very inspiring. You see this all the time. There are charismatic leaders who can touch, lift, make you laugh, make you cry, and really move you in profound ways. The question is, what happens when you get home? When you're back to your lonely life, your challenges. So maybe this inspiration may last for a night or 2. But as we all know, inspiration dissipates usually as quickly as it comes. What happened? You were lifted on the wings of someone else, not yours. Methodology teaches you that no matter where you are, you may go to the darkest places, but you have been now empowered in a new way, and you're no longer the same person. That's a whole different type of education. That's an education that has made you into a leader. Not just that you were able to listen to and hear and be touched by another. That is when methodology and tools are conveyed. So the Torah makes this not some type of option. It says this is a requirement. And in simple terms, Aaron was standing there, and he's about to light a flame, and he has 2 ways to go. Does he wait till the flame rises on its own? It's a split-second decision. Or does he move on? And this distinction, this split second, is the difference between essentially life and death, in a way. His waiting an extra moment is the significance of that. The symbolism of that is the patience and the attention and the sensitivity. It's not about you, the teacher. You have to wait till this flame rises on its own. You have to make sure that even when you're gone, the flame will be able to burn. Yes, it couldn't have been lit without you. No one takes away. Obviously, we all begin as recipients, students, and we listen and we absorb. That's a given. The question is what happens after you've absorbed. At some point, do you have the tools to rise on your own? I remember this class, now we're talking about it because now that we have the center here and we're building more programs and classes. So a few years ago, I was discussing with a few people I was teaching. I said, I'm thinking of giving an advanced class. Or actually, it was a few people who came to me and said they'd like me to give a more advanced class. So yeah, that's what happened. Now I remember. So I said, what do you mean by advanced class? Like, I wasn't insulted. It wasn't like I don't consider this a beginner's class exactly. Even though I remember in the Open Center when I gave a class, it was called Introduction to Kabbalah, so 12 people came. And when it was called Advanced Kabbalah, 80 people came. And I can tell you, I taught the same thing. And that it was just interesting. Even though when they came out with that series of books like, Kabbalah for Dummies or Computers for Dummies, they thought that it may insult people, and people actually bought it. So I guess sometimes people like to be called dummies, sometimes they don't. But at least with Kabbalah, people didn't like to be called Kabbalah for beginners or introductory to Kabbalah, advanced Kabbalah. So I asked these people who asked me about this advanced class, I said, so what do you think an advanced class is exactly? So they said, we really get into deeper things without introductions and without, the repetition and so on. So I said, well, let me tell you what I think an advanced class is. And if you're ready for that, I'm happy to give it. I said an advanced class, in my mind, is not how deep you go. You can go, advanced class means that you will all be obligated once a month to write a paper and to get up in front of the class and present. That's what means an advanced class. And you're no longer just sitting and listening. Now you have to show that you can say something. I'm not saying it'll be marked, but at least that's the challenge. That to me that's a change, a qualitative advanced class. It's not you can read, whether some people read English and some people read Hebrew. Hebrew doesn't mean, just because you read Hebrew doesn't turn you into an advanced student. It just means you know how to read Hebrew. An advanced student means that you're able to do things that are more than just a student does, to the point where one day you could be able to teach. I'm not saying everyone has to become a master teacher. Not everybody necessarily is skilled particularly in that way in communication, but that we have to be not just takers but givers, that we're not just here to listen and be inspired, but also to be a flame that rises on our own, is critical ultimately. And I know this because that's how I was taught, and that's how I attempt to teach. So what this verse is saying, with one word, the Torah is changing the whole picture. This is not about someone transmitting a lot of light. To use a Kabbalistic terminology, it says that the Sheresh HaKelim is higher than the Sheresh HaEres, which means that the root of the containers, the source from where containers derive their power, is higher than the place where light comes from, which is really counterintuitive. You think, and I'm using now Kabbalistic terminology, in Kabbalah, when it talks about, in general, any type of relationship, the words used is Er and Keli. It's simply a term for Er being emanating energy, and Keli, a container, is receiving the energy. Every relationship in its abstract form is a form of either transmitting or receiving. This is true for a couple in marriage. This is true other relationships we have. This is true throughout our lives, even in our own lives. There are times we're in a mode of so-called receiving mode, and times in transmission mode. Okay? And the good balance is, of course, both of them together. So in the Kabbalah, there's long discussions on the balance between transmitting and receiving. For instance, there's a world called the world of Tohu, the chaotic world, where the transmitting is far too extreme, and it overwhelms the containers, and therefore what the Kabbalists call Shviras HaKelim, where the containers are shattered. Think of it as giving so much love, they can't contain it. Or flooding the fields without giving it down, like raindrops. So flooding the fields, yes, a lot of water is coming down, but as Nachum and as Cheni Hamagel said, he said, Reiv Teva einim yechelim lekabel, in the Talmud. The story goes, there was a famine, and he prayed for rain, and he was finally successful, but it didn't just rain, it started pouring. So he had to pray a second time to make sure it doesn't pour, that it comes down in raindrops. Because pouring rain really flooded the fields was just as destructive as the famine itself. Because flooding fields, they obviously destroy the fields. The blessing is raindrops, paced properly, seasoned, so it comes down drop by drop, it's absorbed. A master teacher, a master educator, someone who doesn't just transmit, but also looks at the students and knows how to give a little more perhaps than they can receive, but not to the point of overwhelming or destroying the field. So to allow the person to absorb. So there's this whole balance of too much light and too little container, or too much container and too little light, or you could call it matter and energy. I mean, there are many different terms that can be used, but it's extremely a good formula to understand when you want to get to the root of a challenge. You say, is there too much light or is there too much container? Once you learn that language. It's a way of diagnosing situations as well. So when it comes to what the Torah is saying, that illuminating and transmitting light is a very powerful thing. Obviously, without that, we don't have education, we don't have knowledge, we don't have light, we don't have illumination and warmth. However, there's even something even more powerful, and even rooted in a higher place, Sheresh HaKelim, which is the recipient is rooted greater than where the transmitter is coming from. So when you are able to so-called measure and gauge the recipient, and then give the light in the way that the recipient can receive it, and not just receive it, but rise on their own, Shalheves Elam Elah, a flame that rises on its own, that reaches a much deeper place than all the greatest transmission of light. One expression of this may be, like I once was speaking to someone who was a good speaker. There are great speakers and orators who people go away with and say, wow, brilliant speaker. And then there are other speakers who may not be seen as so brilliant, but people go away empowered with tools that long after the talk, their lives will be changed. Can you combine the two? Obviously you can. But one is about transmitting light, and the other one is about containing it. And the second one requires a lot more humility. Because you'll see it says, Siyag l'chach mishtika. It says one of the qualities of wisdom is silence. You think, what do you mean? If someone is wise, they should be sharing wisdom all the time. They should be sage, giving advice, dispensing advice. And sometimes, and people that's where you want to hear advice from, wise people. You don't want to hear advice from stupid people. So why is it a quality of the wise person to be silent? Because the answer is, silence itself is also a transmission of light. Sometimes it's not about, some people want to show they're smart, so they talk a lot. The truly wise person doesn't care about whether you think he or she is smart, but they care about what you need. And if you don't need their advice and you can figure it out on your own, that's the best advice they can give you, not giving it to you. Or saying enough that you should be able to rise on your own. And this is a challenge, because people who have what to say, you'll see those are the ones that sometimes find it most difficult. But the ones that have that restraint and have that discipline and that maturity are the ones that really can change your life. Now, of course, our tendency would be, I'd love to just get, if I trust or respect a mentor or a teacher, just give me what you have to say. But that may be good for the short term, and it may be good to spoil you, but it does not necessarily bode well for long term. Because the objective here is not the transmission or the reflection of the brilliance of the teacher or the mentor. It's the tools that the student needs. And if the student right now needs silence or needs to build the confidence, even they may be frustrated for a while, that's what needs to be done. Obviously, this too needs to be gauged. It's not a black and white. Sometimes you do need to reach. Just to not give someone because you feel that they may be able to build on their own, well, that too needs, as I said, to be measured. So Baal Yisra teaches us this. Now, to bring this back to the initial questions about who we are and our lives and so on. So if the whole purpose of existence is to be a menorah and to be illuminate others, and that's the reason we're born into a certain type of called dark world, in a sense where certain things are concealed from us, including what our mission in life, by the way, is. Nobody comes down from heaven, no soul comes down with a little packet that says, this is the mission of your life. We're going to have to search for it. And sometimes that search comes with a lot of challenges and pain. So life is essentially a dark place, but at the same time we have the tools to illuminate it. So what does that tell us immediately? Immediately it tells us that we have two things going for us. We have tools, but they are concealed. And two, we need to work at it. So to go back to the question of entitlement versus self-generated effort. So in Kabbalistic and Hasidic thought, basically they say that the highest achievements will always be achieved through a person's self-generated effort. And using terms from the Zohar says that God and the human being have this type of relationship, which also works a symbiotic fashion, in the sense where what we call there's an asrusa de le'ela. An asrusa de le'ela means that you have what we call a moment of revelation or inspiration from above. An epiphany, some people call it. And then there's a thing called asrusa de latata. In Aramaic, it means the awakening that comes from below, something which you initiate. So initially, everyone would say, well, I wish I could have the first one. When I'm in a dark place or a lonely place and I need assistance or help, why can't God just send me a message or give me the strength to deal with the situation? So the Kabbalah talks about this. Which is greater, the inspiration that comes from above or the effort that comes from below? And the answer given, interestingly, is that each one has a quality that the other doesn't have. That which comes from above is essentially, in quantity, is greater. Because an inspiration that comes from a higher place is going to give you more strength and it'll be more illuminating than any light you may create on your own, because we're small little people. If we have a great prophet or a great teacher or a great mentor come to you and give you a wise piece of advice, it's usually going to be wiser than something you may come up with on your own. That is when we talk quantity, sheer brain power or sheer intensity of light, if you measure it that way. But qualitatively, what is more yours, and what is more, as the Hasidic masters put it, what's more pnimiizdik, what's more internalized and integrated, is always your effort. Because there may be less intensity, it may not be as powerful wisdom or light as that which you're given from another place, but it's yours, and therefore it has permanence. And that permanence, qualitatively, is much more powerful than the light that comes from above. But the way it works, the system usually works, is that we're given all of the above. For instance, the way the mystics put it is that when the Jews left Egypt, that was a gift from above. God took the Jews out of Egypt. They may have earned it, but it wasn't directly a result of their efforts. Time had come, and they were now out of this place. I mean, they had suffered greatly. Then comes month 2, which is the month after Passover. And then we work on our own, which is the counting of the Omer, and refine ourselves. That is human effort from below. Is it as great as a revelation as the Exodus of Egypt, as Passover? No. That's why the second month of the year doesn't have a holiday that's as powerful as Passover. And then comes month 3, which is the month of Sivan, when we receive the Torah at Shavuos, and is considered to be the combination, the fusion of that which came from above and that which came from below. So obviously, we want to have the best of both worlds. And this brings me back to what we talked earlier about the different, destinies. I don't call destinies, rather, the backgrounds that we all grow up in. Whether we earned it or not, the fact is, this world is structured that, as God told King David. King David asked God this following question. Long before Karl Marx, and long before Adam Smith, and capitalism, and all the different economic structures or lack of structures that we have today, there was a man called King David who had a problem with this whole class system of middle class, upper class, and lower class. And he asked God this question. He said to God, the best way to argue with God, of course, is to use God's Torah. It's like a good lawyer. The best way to challenge a judge is to use the judge's own previous decisions. So King David quotes the Bible and says to God, you have yourself said, Li ha-kesef v'li ha-zav, Omer Ne'um Hashem, that you have all the gold and all the silver, which means you have all the wealth in the world. So why is it that you created wealthy people and poor people? Why did you not distribute wealth equally? Which would have saved us a lot of anguish and problems. So this is King David asking God this question thousands of years ago. And God responds also with a pasuk, also with a verse, because then chesed ve'emes man yitzurua. Who then would create chesed in this world? Who would do chesed? If everybody was equal, there would be no one motivated or need to do any love and kindness. Everybody would say, you don't need me, you have as much as I have. So God, this is not just about money, obviously. So God was telling King David the secret of diversity. I created a world where everybody has one strength, or more than one strength, and others don't have that strength, in order to give them the opportunity to be givers and share that strength with others. And I wanted chesed in this world. However, obviously, free choice, free will, comes into play. Will people be wise enough to understand that the blessings we were given were not given because we earned them or deserved them, but because we were trusted with them to help others with those gifts? In other words, it was given to you as a pakadon, as something to watch over, to protect, and to share when the time comes. How many of us truly believe that? Or how many of us think we are self-made people? When a person earns money, we know today, everyone, not just today, at all times, yes, of course it takes a certain amount of skill and wisdom and ingenuity, but it's usually overestimated. There's also other things. There's mazel, timing, things that are not always in our control. Like one guy tells me, who's quite a man of means, he said, a famous statement, so how much you think of wealth and is mazel, and how much is seichel? So he says it's 95% mazel and 5% seichel, which means 95% luck and 5% brains. And if it was 100% luck, I would have a lot more money. That's the way he put it. So yes, of course it creates a certain amount of mind. But the Torah warns us of the fear that you should never say, Kechi v'etzem yadi. You should be afraid of saying that that everything that I have is my own. I'm a self-made individual. And you should know that every gift comes with a blessing. So this is a combination. It's a partnership. No one denies that. As I was discussing this theme this evening, All success is a partnership. You're given resources, and the question is what you'll do with them. So that the mere fact that people are blessed with certain gifts, whether it's gifts of wealth, being born in a wealthy home, or gifts of wisdom, or gifts of extra sensitivity. Different people have different gifts. Everyone has their gifts. That is absolutely the way it was meant to be. As a matter of fact, as God told King David, I specifically made it in a way that it's not equal. Not equal in the sense that different people will have different strengths. But everyone will have certain strengths. The question now is, what will they do with them? So the mere fact that some of us are born in a so-called world of entitlement, that doesn't mean we should become entitled people. That's already a matter of choice. The challenge of a person growing up, let's say, in a house of affluence or success, and is given opportunities that other people simply can't even dream of, is a great challenge. The challenge there, as I mentioned at the outset of this class, is number one, that your first thing is you're going to feel you think it's yours. It's a challenge. The same equal challenge that a person growing up in poverty has. It's a different challenge, maybe even a harder, difficult one. The fact remains statistically, whether we like it or not, that, and this is a real statistic, you can check it out, that people who've made serious amounts of money within 2 generations, their children or grandchildren, and never more than 2 generations, will either not be speaking to each other, and not because they died, but because they're at war, or they will completely squander the money, lawsuits and so on and so forth. There are exceptions, and if you look at the exceptions, interesting exceptions, you'll always see something happen when there was an exception. It wasn't just a fluke. John Rockefeller, who grew up in such affluence, his father was the one the Standard Oil, who made that amount of money. So he writes in his memoirs, you can read it, that he realized that he grew up with this, he felt he could never, how could he overachieve his father? He's never going to make more than his father made. The opportunities, the monopoly he had, etc., etc. So the rest of his life, he's going to be the son of this wealthy billionaire. And he could deceive himself into thinking that, he really is like the wealthy one because he inherited it all. Obviously, I guess he was healthy enough, or maybe his pride was strong enough, and ego, that he didn't want to live that way. But he also wasn't going to reject his father's money. That's not that easy either. So he basically said, I will make philanthropy into a business. My father spent his life making money. I'll spend my life giving it away. Now, was it completely selfless? Well, we have Rockefeller Center, and we have Rockefeller this and Rockefeller that. But he has single-handedly developed many of what we call today nonprofit foundations, and those rules and laws are very much Rockefeller's ingenuity. Now, I'm not saying he was a tzaddik, but he was wise. He understood that he's not going to overshadow his father. He understood that he can live a life of this type of privilege and do nothing with it. And he may feel good and be able to travel anywhere and wield power and be this, but ultimately he understood that it's not earned. So he created an industry out of charity. And again, I'm not, as I say, I'm sure he had his flaws and I'm sure he had his motivations, but it's interesting. So in a way, he preserved it because of what he did, by giving it, by turning it into giving. It's interesting. Bill Gates, the wealthiest man in the world, Warren Buffett, the second, the rest of their lives now they're spending giving away their money. Now you'd think they made so much, they should be busy making even more. I understand it becomes at some point obscene, how much can you use? But there's something that they've come to, I guess, it's a wisdom perhaps when you reach that type of point, that you realize that what can happen the other way around. What will happen to your children and grandchildren should you give them the money to fight over? Now, this is a complicated one. I'm not suggesting everyone here, of course, would not necessarily agree. If your parents had such money, you'd love to just inherit it and be able to do what you want. But let's be honest about it. Would you really excel? Would you really become the greatest person? So, of course, the argument will say, so I won't excel. At least I'll have a comfortable life. Okay, that's very nice from your perspective. But it's not how God wanted it. The soul, the mission of your soul came down here is not to be comfortable, but to be a menorah and to illuminate. So the Torah, nowhere does the Torah discourage wealth, success, hard work. The Torah is not one that says the meek shall inherit the earth. Poverty is not considered a blessing, as the fiddler on the roof reminds us. It's not necessarily a curse, but it's not a blessing. And wealth is absolutely, in the Torah, is considered a blessing. God says, I will bless you with wealth, not just spiritual wealth, physical wealth. So the idea of people being born with gifts is definitely a blessing. But every blessing has two sides to it. A blessing doesn't mean that you cannot squander it, that you can't destroy it. Blessing can destroy you if you don't know how to contain it. Which is why the Torah makes it so important that become a menorah, that you have to rise on your own. Now, for a person who's been surrounded by blessings and wealth, and everything was given to them on a silver platter, that's a very profound challenge. And the way a person really comes to do anything with that is either through a real discipline. Sadly, what I've seen is usually people that have grown up with such entitlement, it's only when things don't work that they wake up, or maybe not even then. In other words, when their marriages don't work, when there's real pain and loss, and I'm not wishing that on anyone, but often that's what happens, because then they suddenly realize that I thought I had everything. Everything was given to me, but I don't have a happy life. A guy who's today, I don't know if you call financial advisors, I don't know if you're supposed to mention them even, but one financial advisor told me that the higher the net worth his client, the more miserable they were. And he said to me, across the board. It was interesting to me, personally. Why is that the case? Because obviously that's the reason is because there's an absolute imbalance between inside the need to achieve something, and on the other hand, it's just been given to you, or it's just sitting there. This doesn't mean that a person is doomed. On the other hand, a person growing up at the other end of it, deprivation, as I said before, is not necessarily a blessing, but it has its own challenge. The bottom line is we're all in the same boat. If a person will not find some skill that they have, that they will self-generate, that they will rise on their own, there's no question whether you're born in a, let's put it, not with many opportunities, or with many opportunities, there's no way a person will succeed. And on the other hand, if a person does follow that etiquette, the concept that you must rise on your own, then whether it's born in wealth, or born with other gifts, or born without that type of opportunity, but other opportunities, you will excel. That's the key. So if you want the formula for excellence and success, across the board is the people who learned the secret of self-generated work. Sometimes they learned it not by their choice. Sometimes, unfortunately, you see a lot of Holocaust survivors have that because it was simply the only way to survive. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was obligation to those that were lost, to that they have to rebuild families, achieve. Maybe it's what kept them alive in the first place, that drive, the need to overcome adversity. Adversity doesn't mean that anyone should wish that on anyone. So sometimes it comes through serious challenges in life that bring that out of us. And other times, probably more rare, are those of us that just understand it and simply live by it. There are many of us we live in privileged times, because even in the worst situation, even though not everyone is born with the same opportunities, this is not, we live in prosperous times. Everyone today is living in a free world. We live in a world where our grandparents, if you compare, even the poorest person today doesn't come close to the poverty of 100, 150 years ago in Eastern Europe and Russia, where, for them was a blessing that they were able to bring home a potato for Shabbos. Now, I'm not trying to compare. Everything is relative. We can't compare our times to those times. But just in context, it's important to know we live in very privileged times. At the same time, we live probably much more miserable than they were. With all our gadgets, with all our blueberries and blackberries and brown berries. You could trademark that if you like. We are not happier people. Well, people are communicating better today. Come on. I was yesterday at a party, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, I do believe it. I just read an article that in any particular group today, 3 or 4 out of 10 people will be on a BlackBerry or iPhone, whatever it is, checking their emails or texting or whatever it's called. So I was sitting at this party in a house. It's all family. And yes, out of 20 people, 8 people were doing it almost all the time. It was really it's pathetic in a way. I know we all do it. I actually don't even have it. I'm not interested in it. I just saw this. It's like I have enough email. I'm addicted enough to email on my computer. I don't need it with me 24/7 or 24/6, whatever it is. And I'm not judging anybody here. I know it's very important. And as they say today, when you have that opportunity, how could you not use it, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm guilty myself of email and all the other, Facebook and all the other stuff. So I'm not here to criticize, but I'm looking at myself as well. Is this like creating better communication? I mean, like we express better love through all these tools. Are people really more loving? I know for my work, it's definitely more efficient, easy to get out a message. But is that like really what it's about? So I'm just things I wonder about myself. So the fact that we have so much so-called opportunities doesn't necessarily mean that we're using them in the correct way or that we're making our lives happier. At the same time, I have my granddaughter in my house right now, who's 6 months old. These things don't make a damn difference to her. BlackBerries or emails. As a matter of fact, when she's in the room, I feel guilty even checking my email, if you know what I mean. Like, I see here's what will shape her will be my sitting with her and playing with her. Or not just me, her parents, others in the family. And that's how we've all been shaped. I wonder how I would be like if my parents and everyone around me were busy 3/4 of the time on their BlackBerries. So it's important just to put these things in context, because you see, even we may say, okay, we're deprived. Well, we have many, many gifts today. We have opportunities. You can achieve things today in 5 minutes, what once upon a time might have taken 5 years. But what do we do with extra time? So there's really nothing to do with what we were blessed with. That's the bottom line. It's understanding why are we here. If you're a menorah and you're illuminating, and the illumination is a way of rising on your own, that's what makes the difference. Everything else is technical, as they say, is the mechanics. And that's the wisdom of the Torah thousands of years ago that made this statement, and it lives till today. This word, Baha'u'llah, no matter what gadgets will be created, I don't know what's coming in the rest of the 21st century, but this lesson will never be lost, because it is the secret to life's success. The ability to accomplish something on your own through your tools and your skills, and particularly in illuminating and warming other people. And everybody here has that ability. I'm telling you, try it out. Do something tonight or tomorrow that illuminates or warms another person. And in a way that's both unique to you, meaning you rising on your own as a flame, and you help the other person rise on their own. Then tell me if there's another achievement in this next month or two, or I would say even year or two, not to go that far, that compares to that. That's where life plays itself out. And those are the permanent things that remain. Because firstly, it is the fulfillment of your mission. Secondly, it is ultimately what makes you indispensable. Everything else, the things you receive, the things that you take in life, don't make you indispensable. We all are takers. As I mentioned last week's class, yes, there are definitely creative parasites who know how to take in better ways than others, and maybe we all develop tools, but really our uniqueness is in how we give and how we illuminate and how we warm others. And just the message that you have the ability to rise on your own, no matter what anyone gave you, whether you're born in privilege or you're born with gifts, that you have something inside of you that is yours and yours, unique, yours. I don't know if there's a more dignified statement than that in life. And to get gifts, as I said, is a great bless. God should bless everyone to have as many gifts as possible. Obviously, and hopefully, in ways that don't destroy us. But the bottom line is, what have you achieved on your own? And that's what you will be asked, and that's what we should ask ourselves. And above all, as I said before, there's a sense in each of us, we all have that instinct, that if we have not done that, there's definitely a part of you that will remain very miserable. Some of us don't like that misery, so we numb it, and we conceal it, we sugarcoat it with all kinds of different things that distract us. But there's a part of us that will always nag you. What have you achieved that you were supposed to achieve? How did you rise on your own in ways that not I and no one else can rise but you? And that's the ultimate message in this one word, Ba'al Yisra. I didn't even get into the rest of the chapter that you can do on your own, rise on your own. I just wanted to share, I think, a literally indispensable message. And I remember when I heard it for the first time, it was really powerful. Until this day, it still resonates. It's still a driving thing, because in those days, in those moments when you're like alone and you don't feel any inspiration and you don't feel anyone's there, and you say to yourself, look, maybe that tells me that I have something to generate that no one else can give me. So even that type of loneliness, existential loneliness, can be turned into a very powerful force. That's a moment for you to reflect. So what are you generating? Do you need someone else to stimulate you all the time? You need someone else to lift you. Now, obviously, there are times we all need each other, and we need someone to lean on. I'm not suggesting we don't have that. But there are times, as Hillel put it, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Which means that we have something unique to contribute. And I personally always look out whenever I meet people to find that side in them, because I want to benefit from it, of course. That Ezu Chacham Halemed Mekol Adam, it says, who is the wise person? The one who learns and learns something from everyone. So imagine you can learn something from every person. But in return, what it gives that person is the dignity and the respect, that they have something unique to give. So I hope I'm able to elicit that in you, and hopefully you can elicit it in me. And maybe that's part of the mission, not maybe, it is the mission of the Meaningful Life Center, and hence the name. That we all have something meaningful to contribute, and truly meaningful, meaning now, that will affect the world now and forever. So I want to bless and wish everybody that this week, when we have the special power of this week's field of energy called Baal Ezcha, that it may be a good beginning, an opening, where you can learn to rise a bit on your own, your little flame. It's not so much dramatics and fireworks. It's, as I said, quality, not quantity. Because your little flame can do something that no one else can do. And when you do that, you will help others rise on their own. It's all by example. And flames, as we know, have one of those qualities that when a flame lights up another flame, the first flame is never diminished. So in life, material world, whenever you give something, usually you have less. But there is an area in life that the more you give, the more you have. And with flames, that's how it is, because when flames light flames, they come together, it's a much stronger flame, and the original flame was not diminished. So think of that as well, as we go through this week. So, let me just make a few announcements, and then we shall conclude. First of all, the class is dedicated by our good friend, Mark. Welcome back from Israel, the Holy Land. In honor of your uncle, Mark's uncle, Yankel ben Menachem Mendel, whose yahrzeit was on the 14th of Sivan. And on the other side of things, the parents' wedding anniversary on the 15th of Sivan, and your father's Nachum Chaim ben Sarah Gold's birthday on the 18th of Sivan. Got that right? Okay, Sivan celebrations. And anyone who wants to dedicate a class or is interested in dedicating the weekly email, please see me or Velvel or Gold Malka up front there. And tomorrow night, I should just announce that Philip's class will not take place for personal reasons. Nothing personal, I mean, with anybody coming to the class for his own thing. But it will hopefully resume. We'll let you know. And meanwhile, again, anyone, if you'd like to leave your email address, if you haven't, can keep you, first we'll get the weekly email that I write, and as well as keep you updated on what's going on here. And finally, well, I feel blessed and honored to spend time with kindred flames that hopefully will all rise in their own unique way, and we can all together celebrate a synergetic, larger flame that illuminates and warms this darker and colder universe. So, good evening, everyone, and until next Wednesday night, where I shall return. And good night as well to the web audience. Everyone be well. Bye-bye.